And between us and the fence post, it may not be incredibly compelling in the short term, but it can be in the longer term, and we can take steps toward compelling for now. So safety and security is going to be all about where it's at in terms of business winners and business losers. The other huge paradigm shift is all about health. People thinking about their health differently, people prioritizing their health, people thinking not just about physical health, but also about mental health. We know that mental health issues are greater than they've ever been right now. There was a study that showed that 75% of people are experiencing social isolation. 67% of people feel stressed. 57% of people feel anxiety. 12% of people are juggling and feel like they can't focus. I mean, it's just like you name the issue, it's coming up. And so companies that serve health needs will rise. Organizations that attend to mental health issues will be really important to us. Interestingly, teledoc services used to be like 3% of the market, and now they're 70% of the market. The call for social work, the call for counseling services, the call for psychological services has risen significantly because of mental health issues. And I always love to talk about the Maslow pyramid. You all learned about Maslow in high school. You remember this. And we've spent a lot of our careers thinking about the top part of that Maslow hierarchy. We worry about if people have a sense of belonging, and do they feel valued, and do they have a sense of self-actualization? Do they feel like they're serving their broader purpose? But what has happened is a lot of people have been bumped right back down to the bottom of that Maslow hierarchy, and we worry about physiological safety. We worry about basic security needs like we didn't before. And so I think this idea of health and well-being and mental state is a big deal, and companies that attend to that are going to succeed more likely than companies that don't. Relationships are huge right now, right? Like all of our bubbles have gotten really small. We love our people, but oh my goodness, we're talking to a very small set of people compared to the way we might have been previously. And so relationships are shifting. There's been more demand for divorce attorneys. There's been more demand for counseling services like family counseling and marriage counseling. There's been more call for marriage licenses because our relationships are shifting and because we've got so much focus on those close relationships. And life cycle is certainly interesting as well. Any good demographer will tell you that rises and falls in businesses, rises and falls in the marketplace will be based on life cycle. So follow the life cycle and you will follow the product demand. So if we have a baby boom in 6 months or 9 months or whatever it ends up being, we'll see lots of uptick of companies serving people with babies, like diaper companies or crib companies. And a couple of years later, those who make toddler toys are going to be all about growth and so on. So it's interesting to think about that as well. The other thing to give some thought to is the experience of home. So we're seeing more wear and tear on stuff that we use at home, right? We're not using the coffee machine in the workplace as much, so we might need to replace our coffee machine at home, or we might need more supplies at home than we've needed in the past. People are looking around and saying, you know, that carpeting's looking a little more worn than I remembered, or hey, let's put that deck on the back of the house, honey. We're seeing tons of increase in businesses that supply the home in all kinds of ways. And we've come into this receive versus retrieve mode in terms of the way that we do business. We have food delivered to our house. We shop at home and have things delivered to our home. We work out at home. And so all of these things are kind of coming to the door, or they're things that we're doing at home. And we're doing a lot more in terms of entertainment at home. So you think about the sin taxes, right? Sin taxes are things like taxes on tobacco or taxes on alcohol. Alcohol sales are at an all-time high. Online gambling is increased. Puzzle sales are at an all-time high. So if you were a little company making puzzles before, you are very happy to be a little company making puzzles and growing like crazy. Even bicycle sales are really, really up. The reason all of this is important to us is because these are the clients we're serving, these are the companies we're working for, and this is the context within which we're thinking about the office, we're thinking about our work, and we're thinking about our own behaviors and how we relate to the world around us. So I think it's kind of fun to think about this business reset and who will be the winners and who will be the losers. So here's a question for you. David mentioned you should keep your keyboard handy and kind of stay in front of it. If you wouldn't mind going ahead and putting an A, B, C, or D in the chat, that would be brilliant. So here's the question for you. How significant do you expect the changes in the work experience to be? A, sweeping, things will never be the same. B, moderate, things will be different but may not be too overwhelming. C, insignificant, things will be crazy for a while but then they will pretty much get back to normal. Or D, I'm not sure, things seem to be changing daily. So go ahead and give some thought to this, pop your A, B, C, or D into the chat. One thing I'll say while you're voting, I think this is that moment to compare to being on a boat. You know, like if you've ever been on a boat for the day, you go out and you spend time with friends and you're in the sun and you're having a beverage and you're snacking and, you know, you're just having a great day. But interestingly, at the end of the day, you get back and you're exhausted. You're like, why am I exhausted? I've been sitting on a boat all day enjoying my friends. What's going on? The reason you're exhausted is because you're constantly getting re-equilibrium. You're constantly re-acclimating because of the boat moving at a physical level. You're constantly getting your equilibrium again and again, even if you're sitting down on the boat. It's like that for us today, where you just think you get used to something and boom, something else changes. You just think you have something figured out and boom, more information comes at you. So you're in this constant state of flux, this constant state of disequilibrium, and that can make things really exhausting. So interesting to think about how we all cope and how we're all working through the flux that can happen on a day-to-day or a week-by-week basis. So David, how are we looking on this one? What are you mostly seeing?
Overwhelmingly B, moderate. Things will be different, but may not be too overwhelming. I've also seen a few C's, insignificant. Things will be crazy for a while, but then they'll pretty much get back to normal. But the majority seems to be B.
Awesome. Good. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for voting. Yeah, you know, it's super interesting, right? Like when we asked this question at the very beginning of the pandemic, everybody said A and there were 0 C's, right? And as we've gotten acclimated, as we've adapted, it seems like we're seeing more on the side of B's and C's. And I think that your experience with this is most important. Your job, your region, your market, your company will dictate how you react to this question. If we take this at a macro level, I absolutely believe this is going to be the most significant reinvention of work in our experience. This is causing us to think differently about work. So your particular circumstance may be less reinvention and more kind of incremental change. But if we look kind of globally at a meta-analysis, this is going to be a really big deal. And that is really good news for us because we can come back from the coronavirus. We can respond effectively to the pandemic, but we can also use this as an accelerator. This can be an option for us to reinvent and reimagine the work experience in the workplace. You know how in our industry, we always are talking about how do we get workplace on the minds of senior executives? How do we get work experience on the radar screens of the C-suite? How do we make work experience top of mind for people who sign the checks? Which CoreNet event have you been to that didn't come up? I think it comes up at every conference one way or another. And we are having a moment, right? Like this idea of workplace, this idea of work experience is on the mind of tons of senior executives because they're realizing how critical it is to their culture, how critical it is to their innovation, how critical it is to their success. So we have this moment, and you've heard this, I shudder to even say this, I probably shouldn't even say it, but you've heard the Winston Churchill quote, "Never waste a good crisis." We've got a moment to really do some exciting things and reimagine and accelerate our way out of this. So I think we take advantage of it. So working from home is here to stay. This is nothing for new for lots of companies. Companies have done remote work forever. Companies are global. They work in different regions. It can be super exhausting to work from home. You're not moving as much. It's more intense. You're not connected with people. You don't feel as plugged into the purpose of the organization. It can also be pretty nice, right? Like you can roll out of bed and not have a commute. You can, I don't know, maybe you show up in your sweatpants every day. There may be ways that you stay connected with your family during the workday. You know, you run out and get another cup of coffee and you get to chat with a niece or a nephew or a child that may be living with you or who is your child. So it can be both exhausting and fulfilling. But one of the things we know is it's not an either or. That either or conversation is probably less helpful. We've talked to 331 customer groups in some roundtable research that we've been doing. And every single company we've talked to has said some amount of work from home will continue. A lot of companies are saying it will be minimal. We want to bring people back as a primary way of doing business. Other companies say, no, it's going to be a bigger proportion of our business. All companies, though, are saying some work from home will continue. And so we know it's not an either or. We know it's a both and in terms of how we think about the office. But we know the office is utterly critical, and we know that it is so important in terms of our success moving forward. So here's a question for you. To what extent are you optimistic about the post-vaccine future? A, very optimistic, glass half full. B, moderate, enough said. C, pessimistic, I'm not sure how great things will really be. Or D, I waffle and it varies depending on when you ask me. So go ahead and give this some thought. This has been another question that I was asked by a reporter 2 weeks ago. Like, what's our level of optimism? When we talk to customers, what do we hear from them about their level of optimism? So I'm curious about what you'll say on this one. What are we seeing on this one, David?
Well, we're seeing a lot of A's.
Good.
A few B's, and a couple D's.
Good. Yeah. You know, I think that's reality. I think sometimes you can feel pretty darn optimistic, and other times you're like, ugh, not so much. Interestingly, there's some research that shows that whatever state you're in mentally literally affects how you interpret incoming information. So incoming information just is what it is, right? It's good, it's bad, it's a fact, it's an interpretation from someone. If you're in a great state of mind, you're going to hear that in a more optimistic way than if you're in a more negative state of mind. Other thing I just saw some research on, this is fascinating. The more you marinate in bad news or anxiety, the more it will literally change your brain. And it is correlated with greater incidence of dementia-like symptoms. So if you're marinating in bad news or ruminating on worry, it will literally change some of your brain chemistry, and it's been correlated, as I said, with some of these brain issues. So there's a really good reason to hang out with the people on our call who are glass half full optimistic folks, or who are feeling more moderately. Not that there's anything wrong with that. If you do feel negatively, it's absolutely reality for a lot of us, and we need to give ourselves permission to have some of those down days, certainly, but optimism can be really good for your health. So awesome. Glad to hear what you all are thinking on that. So these are research-based perspectives on why the office will be critical to us. So first reason that the office cannot go away has everything to do with innovation. We know that innovation comes from the edges. The people who have the most interesting, innovative, earth-shattering ideas are often not the people who are steeped deeply in the discipline. They're the people who haven't been thinking about it at all, who have kind of this outsider's perspective, this naivete. They're not aware of the current barriers, and so they bring new ideas in. When you're in the office, you are running into people that you don't work with regularly, and they're talking about things that are different, and that's a really good thing. The other thing we know about innovation is that it is based on connecting disparate ideas. And that is easier to do when you're in the office. You run into the person in the work cafe and you talk about something, and you run into somebody in the elevator and elevator lobby and you talk about something else. And then you go into your project team meeting and something else comes up, and you put those disparate ideas together and you come up with insights. That is certainly something you can do virtually and you can do in your home office when you're on your Teams call, but it's just a lot easier to do when you're in the office. The other thing that's a big deal is when we're in the office together, we can move so much more quickly, and we have this unimpeded, fast flow of ideas. You know, like I think our quote of the year for 2020 is going to be, "You're on mute." Like, how many times are you on a Teams call or a Zoom call or pick your platform and somebody drops or somebody freezes or somebody's trying to talk and they're muted? We just can't go fast enough using technology. Even the fastest tech platforms aren't fast enough compared to being in person. Because when you're in person, you're in a room together and you're building on each other's ideas and you're interrupting each other in a constructive way, and you're popping Post-it notes up on the wall and you're elbow to elbow, or you're safe distanced with a mask on, and you're still connecting together in a way that keeps ideas flowing really, really quickly. And that fast flow is critical for innovation. Here's something we absolutely know. In 2008, 2009, lots of companies sent everybody home. There was that huge economic downturn and lots of companies were trying to save costs. So they sent everybody home. Within a year or two, they brought everybody back, and they were very public about saying, we're bringing people back because we can't be as innovative, we can't be as competitive, we can't be as collaborative, and we can't differentiate with our customers as much. We have got to be together because we need our togetherness in order to drive our innovation. So for me, one of the number one things that brings us together in an office is all about innovation, and our customers know this, and we can remind them about it. Here's another question for you. To what extent do you expect shifts in the way your company adds value to the market? How innovative do you see your company being? A, massively. The pandemic has brought about a reboot and a reimagining of our business. B, moderately, some of what we do will change, but overall, we're still delivering value relevant to the times. C, minimally, we're continuing to deliver on our fundamental value equations without a lot of change. Or D, I have no idea, but I'll keep thinking about it. So give some thought to this one. I think this one's really interesting. We've been having a lot of conversations with customers lately about culture and how surprised or not you are about your culture, because your culture is so important to your experience, and the way companies deal with the pandemic is such a window to their culture. So that's an interesting take on this innovation question, right? Like, do you experience your company as doing innovative things culturally? Do you experience your culture as supporting innovation? Interesting to find out. Where are we at on this one, David? What are mostly coming in here?
I see a lot of A's and B's.
Awesome. Oh, that's really cool. When we
Right?
get to Q&A, come off mute if you don't mind and tell us the ways that you're innovating. David, make me a note, would you, that we want to
Yep.
ask everybody about that again at the end, because this is cool stuff, right? This is the MacGyver rule. Some of you remember MacGyver because you're old enough to remember the original MacGyver, but the good news is MacGyver's come back. So even if you're not old enough to remember the original, you can remember the new. MacGyver is this, like, I don't know, action guy, and he was on this show, and he would always get himself into scrapes or he'd get trapped. And so if he had a paper clip and a stick of chewing gum, he could make a rocket ship. He was absolutely innovative. He was absolutely improvisational, and he could solve any problem in a crazy kind of way. That is what we have the opportunity to do today, right? We can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and really innovate, because when we're faced with incredible barriers, that is when we have to really figure out how to do things differently. So I'd love to hear about what kinds of things you're doing, you A's and B's, in terms of your companies. Here's another reason the office absolutely cannot go away, and that is about talent and engagement. So brain drain is a really big deal. We know the more people work from home, the more likely they are to have a side hustle. The more likely they are to have a side hustle, the more likely they are to go off and do their side hustle and leave our organizations. In addition, when people are at home, they're more likely to be distracted, right? Like I don't know, they're working on their emails while they're on a call, or maybe they're folding laundry during the project team meeting. We know bad behavior can happen in meeting rooms as well. We've probably all been guilty of it if we are truthful, that, you had your laptop open and you were multitasking during a meeting, maybe a little bit, but it happens a lot more at home. So that brain drain is a big deal. The other drain issue has to do with IT security. There was a brilliant study where 84% of IT leaders were seeing challenges in terms of people falling victim to phishing schemes, people who were giving more information that they should have been, firewalls that were being breached because people were home and they just didn't have the same security protocols that they were attending to. So talent and engagement is huge. We want to keep people engaged. We want to maintain talent, and that's harder to do when people are home. The other thing that's huge here is attraction and retention. So think about culture as an iceberg. Under the surface of the water are things that you can't see. It's the norms and values and assumptions that are true about culture. You can't see them, but they're still palpable. Above the surface of the water, like an iceberg, is place. Place is the most visible artifact of culture. And it is really important to sending us cues about what we value. Like, how much do we value collaboration? How much do we respect people and value well-being? How much do we provide people with tools and technology to get their work done most effectively? Attraction and retention is affected when we don't have the place as a way to send cues and messages and reinforce behavior in the same kinds of ways. It's kind of like we're used to relying on all 5 of our senses, but if all of a sudden one of those senses is cut off, we just don't have access to that stream of information anymore. And that's exactly what's happening when we send everybody home. We don't have the place in order to send those messages, in order to send those cues, in order to kind of keep us all marching in the same direction, because we just don't have access to the cues. The other thing about talent and engagement and attraction and retention is that people join companies because of other people. The number one reason people join a company is for the organization in total. I can see myself succeeding there. I can see career development there. I can imagine working with all those people I met during my interview process. The number one reason people stay with an organization is because they have a best friend at work. There's a great book called Vital Friends by Tom Rath that talks about the fact that this friendship is critical. You make friends in an office, and it's a lot easier to do than when you're at home working online. The number one reason people leave an organization, you've heard this before, it's because of leaders that aren't terrific. So attraction, retention, talent, and engagement have everything to do with us staying connected, going into the office, reducing distractions, and really making sure we've got cues from the place that tell us about what kind of behavior goes around here. So here's another question for you. To what extent do you believe your offices attract and engage people? A, significantly, people love our offices for good reasons. B, somewhat, we have some elements which are quite effective. C, we have improvements we could make. Or D, I'll have to tell you more offline. So go ahead and give us a sense for how much do you think your offices attract and engage people? This is always fun, especially when we have an audience that's all A&D folks, like, are they the cobbler's children, or do they have world-class offices that are better than most? And certainly their clients do, because they're designing brilliantly. David, what are we seeing on this one?
Lots of A's.
Awesome.
A few B's.
Cool.
So
yeah, I think this is a big deal. Sorry, David?
Yeah, significantly. People love our offices for good reason.
Good. I love it. Funny story. We worked with a client years ago, and they had this really awesome new office in the Midwest. And they used to, because the office was so successful, they used to bring people to it for like recruiting and interviews and stuff. But then it was really funny because sometimes they would place them at different offices, not at the office they interviewed at. So it was a little bit of a bait and switch, but by goodness, they were using that office in terms of attracting people for sure. So yeah, this has everything to do with talent and engagement and attraction and retention. Here's another reason the office absolutely cannot go away, and that has to do with humanity and empathy. There is an absolute scientific connection between our ability to be present with other people and our health and well-being. When people are connected with others, like person to person, not just mitigated by technology, they have less morbidity and less mortality. It is our instinct to come together in groups. We are herd animals, we are tribe animals, and when we sense threat or danger, we want to come together. We know there's strength in numbers. So, oh my gosh, we went to Roatan for vacation. It is one of the best places you could ever go. So someday if we get to go on vacation again, think about Roatan. I know we will be. So my husband and our son were going on a nighttime snorkel. And so they were told that they were going to see some sharks during this nighttime snorkel, about which I was thrilled. And everybody on the nighttime snorkel was given by the guide a tin can with like coins in it. And he said, if you see a shark, you just wiggle your tin can. Like, great, you're giving us a tin can as the defense against sharks. But the other thing he said is swim together as a group, because if you swim together as a group, the shark will perceive you as a large animal instead of small, prey. So I thought that was super interesting. And it's a great example of how we need to come together. The other thing about our humanity and empathy is that when we're together with other people, we release a brain chemical called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a brain chemical that helps us feel happy. It helps us feel satisfied. It gives us a sense of fulfillment and happiness. The other thing that it does is it tends to suppress a brain chemical called adrenocorticotropin. Adrenocorticotropin releases things like adrenaline and cortisone. Those things are good if we're running away from predators, but in lots of doses over time, i.e. when we're stressed, that can cause a lot of problems for us in terms of our mental and physical and cognitive well-being. So when we're together, if we're releasing oxytocin and that reduces this adrenocorticotropin, that is a very good thing. It is the brain chemistry explanation for why we need other people and why we need to be together with other people. We also have an identity based on our role, right? Like not just our roles at home, but our roles at work. I'm a colleague, I'm a team member, I'm a project member, I'm a people leader. Whatever that role is all about us being together. A SHRM study, Society for Human Resource Management, found that 71% of people were struggling to adjust in working from home. And I already told you about social isolation. The more people were working from home, the more they felt socially isolated. There was absolute correlation in those statistics. Purpose is another one that's super critical. So Harvard has demonstrated in their studies that when companies have a really clear sense of purpose, they're much more likely to succeed. Purpose is critical for organizational success. And when we're together in place, it makes a really big difference in terms of our common sense of purpose. I walk into the front door with somebody. I may not know them really well, but we have shown up together to do good work for the common purpose that we share in our organization. I may see somebody across the coffee bar and I may not know them really well. Maybe I don't work with them closely, but we are showing up together to do something. This is the reason, remember in the olden days when you used to go to the club and work out? This is the reason that you go to the club and work out and your treadmill in the lower level collects dust. There's something about showing up together in our baseball hats in the morning to work out. There is something about showing up together in the workplace and really being able to feel that common sense of purpose. That SHRM study I mentioned found that 65% of companies are struggling with morale. We need a line of sight. Figuratively, that means I see how my work impacts your work, impacts her work, impacts the customer. Literally, that means I can see across the space and know who I need to connect with. I can see across my space and know that there are other people who are here working on things together with me. And we are unified as something that is important, and we're unified and working towards something bigger than ourselves. Purpose is about, number one, having a sense that there's something bigger than you that matters. 2, having a sense that you can make a unique contribution to that. And 3, having a sense that that has something to do with people. You'll sign up for your, corporate requirement that we grow at 15% a year. But the thing that will get you out of bed in the morning is feeling like that matters to people somehow. So purpose is a big deal. Energy is also related to this. There is a sociological concept called the bandwagon effect. The idea is that when we are together with people, we tend to draw energy from the group. There's something about being in the town hall meeting with 200 other people, or being in the conference room with 20 other people and connecting with another group of 20 here, group of 20 there, or group of 20 there. There's something about being together that tends to energize us and motivate us. The other thing is all about communication effectiveness. When we have information density, it means that more people know more things more immediately. It helps us stay aligned, and it helps us get things done, because I can make quicker decisions if I know more things. I can get things done across the organization with my network if we're all on the same page and all aligned. So that communication effectiveness is a big deal. I have a colleague who says, and I love this, when you're not in the office, you can't hear the birds chirping. Oh, I love it. When you watch the disaster movie and the tsunami is going to hit the island, you can't hear the birds chirping. Everything gets silent. All the wildlife has somehow known that they need to migrate up the mountain. The same thing is true with humans. We need to kind of hear things around us. We need to feel tuned into things around us. This is being in the work cafe and just kind of overhearing the conversation, or I don't know, going to the coffee machine and being able to just check in and say, hey, how's it going for you? Hey, what did you hear about such and such? Hey, what do you think about such and such? That is hearing the birds chirping figuratively. So we need to feel like we are tuned in. We need to feel like we're in the loop in terms of information. Here's a question for you. What do you believe people miss most about the office? A, other people. B, the technology. C, getting out of the house. D, something else. Or E, not a lot, honestly. So go ahead and give some thought to this one. I've already primed you toward A, but feel free to make a different choice. David, what are we seeing on this one?
All kinds of A's.
Yep.
Yeah, all kinds of A's.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, and hopefully nobody says E. If you're an E, we want to hear from you in the Q&A.
Not at all, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is so true, right? Like we miss each other. It's been so great because we've had a lot of people going back to work at headquarters in Grand Rapids, and they're all saying like, I see somebody across the work cafe and I'm so happy to see that person. Like, I'm not even sure that person was my best friend in the whole world before the pandemic. I didn't work super closely with that person, but now I'm like, we're like in the romantic movie when you see people like running across the field with their arms outstretched. You're like, oh, there you are, right? We are staying connected virtually, but we aren't able to feel as connected. And so other people are absolutely a reason that we want to come back. Another big deal is all about variety and movement. There's a brilliant neuroscientist who says our brains are so terribly bored, right? This was true even pre-pandemic. We are, after millennia, we've grown up on the savannah. We watch out for predators and we keep our families safe from predators. We have to find food to feed our families, right? We're protecting ourselves and we're finding prey to feed our families. That is high stakes. And just in the recent past, we kind of, show up at the office in business casual attire and we have polite meetings. And now we're even more constrained because we're sitting at home having polite meetings. Our brains are really bored. We are eating at home. We're working out at home. We are shopping at home. We're working from home. And we can do all those things. But just because we can doesn't mean we should. We need the variety of getting out. We need the routine of getting out. And actually, movement is really healthy. When you move from place to place, it's physically healthy. But there's also some brilliant research that suggests that if you learn something new and then you move, you are more likely to cement that learning. The other thing that's true is we are all experiencing temporal disintegration. That is the scientific reason that you don't know what day it is. And I can't remember what day it is either. So there's something about the routine of going out, right? You arrive in the office about 8:30 every morning, or you go to your client's location a few times a week, or you get out of the house regularly for some other activity. Those routines are important to our sense of orientation, and they also are helpful to our memory. Like, I can remember that I had a conversation with you because it happened in classroom 6, or remember we ran into each other in the parking lot and we talked about blah, blah, blah. It's a lot easier to remember when we can link the memory to physical locations that are different. So one of the reasons the office can't go away is all about variety and movement. And boundaries are huge too, right? Like, we've had tons of work-life literature that's all about boundary. How do we leave work at work? How do we keep work away from personal? How do we protect personal from work? And now we're seeing people say, I love all this time I'm having at home, but I'd like a little distance too, right? Like, I had that tiff with my partner this morning and be nice to get a little distance, or, I've got those 6 loads of laundry. I'd love to get a little distance from those. It can be a really good thing to get away from home or to get away from the office, to have a bit of distance, to have a bit of separation. You might like more separation, somebody else might like less separation, but a little separation can be a very healthy thing. The other thing that's really important is all about culture. We talked a little earlier about how place is the most visible artifact of culture, but culture is also true north. Culture is doing really hard work lately. Culture is how things get done around here, quote unquote. Culture is what people do when no one is looking. And when we sent everybody home, we just didn't have the same opportunities anymore to experience our culture. We can't like look up and run into our leader who's walking through the space and check in. We can't look up and kind of see our teammates around us as much in order to just check in. I was talking to a brilliant leader who is a really great mentor. He's in high demand. Everybody wants him to be their mentor. He's been around forever. He's super wise and super caring. And he said, I don't have any idea how to mentor people anymore if I'm not sitting with them in the office. I can't overhear them and give them feedback on something. I can't be in the middle of a meeting with them and walk to the coffee machine and check in and see how they think about things, or check in and see if they want some coaching. I have no idea how to do this without some physical connection. And the other thing, MIT actually had this great quote that physical distance can result in psychological distance. We need psychological safety. We need psychological proximity to feel like we can bring our best, to know that we have things around us that are super familiar. Familiarity breeds acceptance. The more we see people, the closer our relationship will be. The more we see certain information, the more we're used to things, the more we tend to accept them and like them. And so that's the other reason that the place is so important to the culture. It breeds acceptance. It breeds our ability to bring diverse ideas together. It helps us to feel like we can bring our best and like we are accepted to a greater extent within our broader culture as well. So culture is a very big deal. I always like to close with culture because innovation is this giant big deal at the front end, and culture is this giant big deal as well. And in the middle are also really, really important reasons that the office just cannot go away. So in summary, it is all about these things. We know we can work from home effectively. We've been doing it. We're also hearing that people are starting to hit a wall, and we're hearing that we know the workplace is more important than ever. A lot of times we learn about something's importance because of its absence. And so if there's a silver lining here, we are really, really understanding how important the office is because we just don't have access to it in the same way anymore. But hopefully we will soon. And when we do, we can create it in a really, really safe and compelling manner. So with that, David, I will turn it back to you and see what kinds of questions we have.
Yeah, so I don't know why I'm echoing, but Tracy, you asked the question of ways companies are innovating. Does anybody have any ideas to share around that topic?
Thank you for coming back to that one. Yeah, that's great. And this may not even be like, if you said innovation, you may not have a company that's completely reinventing itself and you're completely doing a 180-degree pivot, but there may just be some interesting things that your company's doing. It would be cool to hear about those. Anyone want to share on this one? Anyone go out on a limb with us? No wrong answers.
Going once, going twice. Okay.
This is Matt. Sorry,
Hey, Matt.
This is Matt Roth. Hey, David. No, like with BlueScope, and it was interesting that talking about purpose and having purpose. We've been rolling out a new purpose within our company and doing all that, trying to keep connections with people. Now everyone is remote for the most part, and so just trying to make those connections through a refresh of purpose and the strategy and everything else, and trying to get people connected that way is something that the company's doing.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. I think this is such a moment where we've been talking a lot about information and transparency across kind of a lot of the conversations we've been having. And companies have this super interesting role where they're becoming a single source of truth. Like when you have tons coming at you and when you are feeling like, ugh, this is uncertain and this is like, I'm not sure what to make of these times. A lot of times what people are doing is they're looking to their company to help them make sense of it, right? Like, what are we hearing? What do we know? What's happening in the marketplace? What does that mean for our company? And then by definition, what does that mean for my job and my role? So I think people are so looking to companies for exactly that, right? Like, what's our purpose? How are we reinventing? How are we reinforcing that purpose, that strategy, those goals? How does this all fit together in terms of weird times and what our company does about it? So I love what you're saying. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
David, this is Margaret. I have a question.
Awesome.
Okay. Just wondering, when we have companies like REI out in Seattle deciding not to move into their brand new campus headquarters, and at the same time, we have, I think in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, it talked about Amazon bought the WeWork, billion-dollar building in Manhattan, in New York City. You have companies going very different ways, and obviously Amazon is in a position from a balance sheet perspective for them to go ahead and buy, and maybe REI as a retailer just is looking to, save wherever they can and conserve. I don't know, but I'm just wondering when there are technology companies like Twitter and Facebook and others that are saying, you can stay and work from home as long as you want to. It's sort of out there indefinitely. I think it seems like it's a really big shift from a few years ago when was it Marissa Mayer at Yahoo brought everybody back from home, and then there was this big brouhaha because the people didn't want to go back. But basically, I think she was supporting your idea of we need people to be together to be able to innovate. Is it now the situation that the Facebooks and the Twitters and the others are saying we're getting as much innovation as we need? Maybe certainly the real estate isn't going to go away completely, but there's going to be just a whole lot less of it needed because they'll be more selective about when you need to go into the office. It might be more a situation of 2 days a week or 3 days a week you'll go in for specific kinds of team meetings where they want that creativity, but the rest of the time you really can get the work done from home, and so they won't need as much. So it just seems to me that maybe that's the trend.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You've said so many things there. It's like those are absolutely the points, right? Like I think that we're in this really interesting moment to think about the purpose for our real estate. Like if we have to ultimately, if we have to reduce density, even if we're post-vaccine and we continue with some reduced density, we may need to think even more intentionally about what the office needs to accomplish. If we can't do all of the same things under any one roof, we need to prioritize. Like, are we really coming together to generate and co-create and build community? What are the things we might be able to do offsite to a greater extent, either in home offices or satellites? So I think that, like, what's the purpose of the office and how does it fit with our organizational strategy is a really important piece. And what we've been hearing is this expanded ecosystem. Like it's going to be about home and hub and spoke. Like some companies are saying, we're going to spend less on our Manhattan real estate costs, and we're going to open a few spoke locations in lower priced markets because we want to bring people together for some of those bigger community building generative activities. But we know that they might want to come to a spoke location if they need to focus and they can't do that well in their home office. So I think that point about how real estate gets adjusted is so interesting. And I think we're seeing this pendulum swing, which I think is a lot like 9/11, right? Like after 9/11, everything was grounded, but eventually we started flying again. We still take off our shoes every time we go, right? Unless we're TSA approved. And so I think there's this pendulum swing toward, oh my gosh, we're going to get out of all of our real estate and we're going to have everybody work from home. I think we're going to see that pendulum come back somewhere in the middle because so many organizations need to come together. And I just think it's short-sighted to think we can do everything from home. Now, if your business is figuring out technological ways for people to feel connected, maybe if they feel disconnected, it helps their innovation. But for most businesses, that's not their strategy. And we have learned, your example of Marissa Meyer, we've learned in terms of so many businesses how critical it is to come together. So, and I think that there's this weird like press thing that's going on too, where you hear about these extremes in the press. And then you see this like pendulum swinging, but in reality, most organizations just realize the physical place is important. And that REI headline broke my heart. Like, I don't know what their decisions are strategically. I'm sure they gave lots and lots of thought to that decision and did a really good job thinking that through. But I think the other thing that's true is tangibly, they can look at the balance sheet and go, oh, this is what this real estate is worth, and this is what we can save. Intangibly, were they able to really quantify the costs of not bringing people together? Were they able to quantify the costs of culture that's eroded or community that's eroded or talent attraction and retention? Sometimes those don't show up on the balance sheet in the same way. So I think it's important that we bring all of that back to the conversation. It's really, really, I love your points. It's so interesting.
And I promise this will be the last one, but just to comment on what you said about culture there and training and the talent, I'm wondering how much there's also just a generational kind of issue here that, hey, if for those of us who've been working at the same office and we know the people and all that, the culture is there. We take it with us even when we're having our Zoom meeting or whatever. But for new people coming out of college who haven't even been there to experience the culture and understand those norms and what people do when they're not being watched, it just seems to me that it's got to be really hard for the new recruits or just the younger ones who maybe aren't even going to be able to learn from some of the more experienced associates, who've been there for 5 or 10 years. I think there's a real that's going to be a very hard challenge because right now everybody's pretty much coasting on, well, if you were working there in March, you're still working there and you brought that with you. But if you're a new hire, I think it's that culture question is really tough, and it's probably going to hit the people in the 20s the hardest.
I couldn't agree more. I actually wrote an article about this. We'll send you a link. It talked about how on earth do you onboard during the pandemic. I think we are trading on what we built up until now. Like we were making deposits of social capital into our social capital balance or account. And we've been making withdrawals. And so for those of us who are older or more seasoned or more mature in our career or been with our companies longer, okay, we can continue making those withdrawals. But you have got to be present together to make some of those deposits into that social capital account. And I think the other thing that's super interesting is to think about your primary, your secondary, and your tertiary network, right? Like you've probably been staying pretty connected to your primary network, but you're losing touch with your secondary and tertiary networks. And they're not people that you would like reach out to or text or set up a meeting with, but they're people that you have a great relationship with, and you build a relationship when you run into them at the coffee bar. And so I think this idea of social capital is huge, and we are in the present, we're surviving on those social capital balances, but we're trading off our future if we're not making those deposits on an ongoing basis, because it's through those secondary and tertiary networks that we learn, that we grow, that we find new opportunities, that we get stretched because we're thinking about things in new ways beyond just our immediate network. So I think that that question is huge, and especially for younger people who are just starting their careers. How on earth do they make some of those connections? It's a great point.
That's a great way to put it too. I like that, the social deposits. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Hi all, this is Sunny. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Hey, I just comment on a couple of things that I've seen with our company. One is more of a hard line nuts and bolts, and the other is more kind of an esoteric principle. But before, when you made the comment about you really don't know how good you got until you take it away, we were always looking at, okay, how do we maximize our space and flex as much as we can? And we were looking at certain aggressive plans of certain percentages. And then after this, we've decided that coming back, we might not want to get that aggressive just because of what we've learned from this forced stay-at-home work pattern. So that's one thing that we've looked at as a company. The other thing I think that has been out there in the general public, and certain companies have done better than others, is to focus on mental health more, to where we're having more one-on-ones. We're directed to have more one-on-ones with our direct reports, and the focus is much less, if nothing at all, on work product and more on, hey, how are you doing? How are you dealing? How's your, how are you getting along? Is there anything that we can do to support you, just to keep you healthy, and not so much as hold up your productivity? So I hope that carries through, and we keep that as a theme at our company, and I hope others are doing that as well.
Yeah, that is brilliantly said. I absolutely believe that that's one of the I wrote an article about predictions for the future of work. There are so many companies that are recognizing this mental health challenge, and they're doing lots of things like Mindfulness Monday or Tuesday yoga with Christine or Wellness Wednesday or financial training on Thursday. And we know that mental health issues are very much on the rise. So the silver lining might be that mental health issues come more to the fore. We can deal with them a little bit more explicitly with less stigma. Companies are doing more support there. Really interesting piece of research on mental health was that people felt a greater level of mental health when they felt like their leader cared. And leaders sometimes say, I don't know if I want to ask questions because I don't want to be invasive. But the feedback was, oh my gosh, ask the question, take the cue about how far somebody wants to go in sharing. That's all good. But really make sure that you're demonstrating that caring, that attention, because there are more mental health issues than ever. Leaders need to attend to those. And when they do, it really, really helps in that kind of a situation. So I think we're so onto something in terms of these mental health issues. Any other questions?
Going once, going twice. Tracy, so on behalf of the Kansas City CoreNet chapter, we appreciate you taking the time to drill down on these interesting and challenging topics. I love that you're working for us, and I love that you're published all over the place. So nice work. We really do appreciate the time today. And if anybody has any questions or anything that I can assist with, happy to connect you and Tracy one-to-one. Let me know.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks.
Great.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Good job. Will we get the access to the slides?
Yeah, absolutely. You bet.
Super. Thank you. It was excellent.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye, guys.